What happens when you decide that silence is the ultimate way to demand love? Like, picture this. You're standing in a cramped Petersburg apartment.
A very bleak setting, yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
And a 41-year-old man is pacing the floor, just back and forth, pacing for like 6 straight hours.
Right.
In the next room, laid out on 2 card tables pushed together, is his 16-year-old wife.
Wow.
And she is dead. She just threw herself out of a window, clutching an icon of the Mother of God to her chest.
It's just a profoundly suffocating image to start with.
It really is. And for those entire 6 hours, this man is trapped in this manic, spiraling internal monologue, just desperately trying to piece together exactly how they arrived at this horrifying moment.
Yeah, it plunges us directly into the deep end of human psychology, which is exactly where Fyodor Dostoyevsky wants us in his short story, The Meek One.
Right.
We are situated firmly inside the head of a grieving, deeply disturbed narrator in the immediate, raw aftermath of a tragedy.
So our mission today for this deep dive is to dissect this intense psychological thriller. We're specifically looking at the translation by Ronald Meyer, just to understand the terrifying anatomy of control, pride, and tragic miscommunication.
Absolutely.
Think about your own life for a second. Have you ever been in a relationship, romantic, familial, or even at work, where silence was wielded as a weapon?
Oh, that's such a relatable dynamic.
Right. Where the things deliberately left unsaid took up infinitely more space in the room than the words actually spoken. This text is the ultimate extreme case study of what happens when communication is entirely replaced by projection and ego.
And to really understand the architecture of that silence, we can't just look at the fractured aftermath. We have to examine the foundation of their power dynamic.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to understand the end, we really have to start at the pawn shop, right?
Exactly. Dostoyevsky drops us into a meet-cute that is entirely transactional. Our narrator is a pawnbroker. The girl, who he only ever refers to as the Meek One, is not even 16 yet.
Which is just, so young.
So young. She comes into his shop to pawn her absolute last pathetic possessions, just to pay for newspaper ads, looking for work as a governess.
The psychological leverage he holds over her from the very first interaction is just staggering.
Yeah.
She isn't bringing in, diamond necklaces.
No.
She brings in a 20-kopeck rabbit skin jacket that is practically falling apart, an amber cigar holder, and finally, a family heirloom, an icon of the Mother of God.
And the pawnbroker consciously weaponizes this exchange.
Yeah, he does.
When she brings in the icon, which he knows is worth 6 rubles, she only asks for 5. He offers her 10, essentially flexing his financial muscle, but he pairs it with this incredibly stern, judgmental demeanor.
Right, he actively relishes making her uncomfortable.
He does. He is establishing the terms of their reality. By giving her more money but pairing it with coldness, he's creating a dynamic where she is entirely dependent on his unpredictable magnanimity.
Because he knows she is utterly out of options.
Exactly. She is an orphan living with 2 abusive aunts who beat her and complain about every morsel of food she consumes.
Just an awful situation.
Worse still, they are actively plotting to sell her off in marriage to a 50-year-old local shopkeeper, a man with a history of beating his previous wives to death.
Let me pause you there, because his reaction to finding that out is wild. He bribes the aunts, intercepts her at the gate of her house, and proposes. But he doesn't pitch himself as a white knight, does he?
Not at all.
It's almost like a dark superhero origin story.
Mm-hmm.
He swoops in to save her from the shopkeeper, but he insists on branding himself as the villain right out of the gate.
Yeah, he really leans into it.
He proudly highlights his flaws. He calls himself a cheap egoist right to her face. He tells her there will be no theater, no fancy clothes, no joy. Is he consciously testing her or just setting a trap?
It is a brilliant mix of both, actually. But fundamentally, it's about ultimate power. He is attracted to her youth and her purity, but what he truly desires is the role of her liberator.
Liberator, wow.
He knows perfectly well that he is the lesser of 2 evils compared to that murderous merchant. And he takes an extreme perverse pleasure in the fact that she has no viable alternative.
Yeah, that is so messed up.
When she pauses at the gate, deep in thought before finally saying yes, he is internally offended that she's even weighing the options.
Which is so arrogant. He's offended she's thinking about it, yet he knows she's backed into a corner. So she makes the choice. She steps through the gate.
Right.
But the moment she crosses the threshold into his apartment, the trap springs shut. And it's an architectural trap as much as a psychological one.
Oh, definitely.
They move into a space that is just 2 rooms divided by a partition for the pawn shop. and he immediately enforces a ridiculously strict economic regime.
Oh, no.
1 ruble a day for food.
It's extreme deprivation.
And more importantly, he institutes what he calls a proud silence. He wants her to independently discover his magnanimity.
This is where we see the classic mechanics of coercive control. The silence isn't just an absence of talking, it's an active, oppressive presence. He wants to force her to read his mind.
And what's in his mind is this elaborate, secret mythology about his past. Like, we learn he used to be a military officer, but he was disgraced and forced to resign.
Right, because he refused to duel a man named Avi over an insult to a fellow captain.
Yeah, Captain Bazuntsev. And after that, his life completely fell apart. He lived like a tramp, sleeping under billiard tables in a miserable place called the Vyazemsky house.
Total fall from grace.
Eventually, he gets a small inheritance, opens the pawn shop, and decides his life's mission is to take revenge on society. He wants to save 30,000 rubles and retire to an estate in the Crimea.
Notice how he frames his own cowardice, though. He views his refusal to duel not as a failure, but as the ultimate act of independent courage.
Delusional.
He really is. He sees himself as a martyr, a man of profound inner nobility misunderstood by a cruel world. He creates this microcosm of a marriage so he can finally be the tyrant rather than the victim.
Wow.
His proud silence is a test. He expects this 16-year-old girl to look at a miserly pawnbroker, magically intuit his tragic backstory and his hidden greatness, and then fall at his feet in unprompted worship.
I'm just baffled by this logic. He sets up this elaborate escape room of a marriage where the grand prize is realizing how great he is, but he refuses to give her any clues. Doesn't he realize he is just torturing her?
What's fascinating here is how it reveals his demonic pride. He explicitly states he wants all or nothing. He doesn't want a partnership, he wants total submission.
Right.
But because she is a straightforward 16-year-old with what he calls cheap, youthful convictions, she doesn't see a misunderstood hero. She only sees exactly what is in front of her, a miserly pawnbroker.
Imagine being the listener in that situation. You've been given 1 ruble a day, and the person who supposedly saved you refuses to even look at you. What does that do to your sanity?
It destroys it.
You can't put a human being in a psychological pressure cooker indefinitely and expect them not to boil over. Her compliance violently flips into rebellion the moment she realizes the reality of her entrapment.
And her rebellion is incredibly strategic. It starts in the one place he exerts the most control, the pawn shop.
Yes, she starts deliberately overvaluing the pledges people bring in. A captain's widow brings in a locket, and the wife gives her way too much money for it.
Right. She is taking his one domain of power and quietly dismantling it.
And when he confronts her, speaking in that calm, infuriatingly reasonable tone he uses, she snaps. She jumps up and starts stomping her feet at him like a wild animal.
She's just so full of suppressed rage.
But the escalation doesn't stop there. She sneaks out of the apartment to meet with a man named Lieutenant Yefimovich.
A crucial detail here, Yefimovich is an old enemy of the pawnbroker from his former regiment.
Of course he is.
He represents the exact sleazy, high society arrogance that the pawnbroker despises and feels humiliated by.
So the pawnbroker discovers this rendezvous. He goes to the apartment where they're meeting, stands behind a closed door and eavesdrops. With a loaded revolver in his pocket.
The tension is incredible.
He is expecting the absolute worst. But to his shock, and honestly his perverse delight, she isn't having it fair. Yefimovich is making these crude advances, and she is brilliantly mocking him.
Yes.
She is laughing in his face, proving her absolute moral purity. The pawnbroker walks in, takes her by the hand, leads her home in total silence, and then just leaves the loaded revolver sitting on the table.
Leaving the revolver on the table is an unspoken challenge. He knows she's familiar with the weapon. It is a physical manifestation of the violence that has been simmering beneath their silence all along.
The next morning brings the climax of this silent war. He wakes up, opens his eyes, and she is standing over his bed, pointing the revolver directly at his temple.
The suspense in this moment is agonizing. Dostoyevsky stretches it out masterfully.
He looks her right in the eyes, and then he makes the conscious decision to close his eyes again. He pretends to be fast asleep. He just lies there, waiting for the bullet.
Yeah.
Is this bravery? Or is it the ultimate passive-aggressive surrender? Like, go ahead, kill me, then you'll really be the villain.
It's pure self-delusion. He is rewriting his own history in real time. By facing the gun now, he genuinely believes he is avenging his past cowardice in the regiment.
Right.
He didn't duel back then, but he faced death today.
But the bullet never comes. She cannot bring herself to pull the trigger.
Yeah.
And his reaction to surviving is to go out and buy a 3-ruble iron bed and a screen.
All right, for the front room.
He physically dissolves the marriage, moving her behind the screen, but keeping her trapped in the apartment. Here's where it gets really interesting. I look at that iron bed behind the screen, and it is a literal iron curtain.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
They are living in a literal Cold War. He thinks he's won because he called her bluff with the gun, but he's actually just locked himself in a room with his hostage.
That analogy is spot on. He views surviving the gun as a definitive victory. He genuinely thinks she is now defeated.
Right.
He is entirely content to wait out the long winter in this bitter silence, believing that her spirit is broken and she will eventually, inevitably, come crawling to him.
But winter turns to April, and the Cold War thaws. But the sudden rush of warmth doesn't bring life. It brings total panic.
It does.
Over the winter, she becomes incredibly thin and sick. She develops a dry cough. He calls in a doctor, Dr. Schroeder, who says she's weak and needs to go to the sea to recover.
Her physical decline perfectly mirrors the emotional starvation of the environment he's created. But the true turning point, the thing that finally shatters his illusion, isn't her failing health. It's a sound.
One day, he's in the shop, and he overhears her in the next room. She's sitting at her table, sewing, and she's singing softly to herself.
Yeah.
It's a romance song, and her voice is so weak it cracks and breaks, and this completely destroys him. And I think I know why. It's not because she's happy, it's because she's comfortable enough to hum a tune while he's in the next room.
Exactly. He has a terrifying realization. The profound implication of that song is that she has entirely forgotten he even exists. Wow. His proud silence didn't force her to revere him, it just made him invisible. She adapted to the sensory deprivation tank he built for her.
And he completely loses his mind. He runs out to the street, wandering around in a daze, then rushes back in and throws himself at her feet.
Total shift in behavior.
He is literally kissing the floor where she stands, hysterically promising to sell the pawn shop, give everything to the poor, and take her away to Boulogne, France, to see the sea.
Right.
He goes from total silence to manic love bombing in the span of an afternoon. And her reaction is gut-wrenching. She is utterly terrified. She recoils from him, and she delivers this heartbreaking line, "I thought that you were going to leave me like that."
That line unlocks the reality of her entire winter. She had found a way to survive the Iron Curtain. She had accepted the alienation. She even calmly mentions to him that she had been reading a book, Gil Blas, and remembered laughing at a funny scene. She had carved out a tiny sliver of peace in the void he forced her into.
So what does this all mean? Why does he think a sudden trip to Boulogne is going to fix months of psychological warfare? He's acting like a grand romantic gesture can overwrite trauma.
This raises an important question about the nature of control. He is still projecting. He realizes his tactic of silence was a mistake, but his fix is just another overwhelming system imposed on her without her consent.
Right.
Before, he demanded her reverence through deprivation. Now, he is violently demanding her love through manic devotion. She is too pure, too fundamentally honest to fake the love he is now requiring of her.
Which brings us back to the fatal day. The narrator's manic love bombing directly triggers the horrifying event we started with. The narrative snaps back to that morning.
The timeline is so compressed here.
Just that morning, they had a conversation. She stood before him and swore to be a true wife. She said she respected his magnanimity.
A statement which, to his warped mind, sounds like total victory.
He believes he's won her back. So he leaves the apartment to go get their foreign passports for this grand trip to Boulogne. He's only on for 2 hours.
Just 2 hours.
But during that time, the servant, Lucaria, watches the Meek One. She sees her take down that same icon of the Mother of God, the one she pawned on their very first meeting.
Right.
She prays, she smiles, and then she climbs into the window with the icon clutched to her chest and throws herself out.
The pawnbroker returns, and the tragedy of the timeline becomes his ultimate obsession.
He arrives home just 5 minutes too late. She's already on the ground.
Yeah.
And the visceral detail he fixates on, the detail a tradesman points out in the courtyard, is that her body isn't smashed.
Yeah, that detail is chilling.
There are no broken bones. There's just a handful of blood. The text specifically notes it was the amount of dessert spoon from an internal concussion. He's obsessed with the math of it all. The 5 minutes. The single spoonful of blood. He genuinely thinks if he had just walked in 5 minutes earlier, he could have saved her.
He's desperate for control, even in hindsight.
He is left completely alone in the apartment, raging against the ticking pendulum of his clock, declaring that men are alone on Earth,
Yeah.
He even likens himself to a Russian bogatyr screaming into an empty field.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it shows the tragedy of how he sees nature and inertia. He blames chance and the 5 minutes.
Right.
He completely misses the profound truth that her death wasn't a sudden whim. It was the ultimate honest refusal to live a lie.
Wow.
She promised to be his true wife that morning, but she knew her soul couldn't survive the suffocating manic love he was now demanding. Jumping with the icon was the only honest way out of the trap he had constructed.
It's devastating. And bringing this narrative back to you, the listener, this deep dive is a dark, poignant reminder of the incredible danger of assuming you know what is going on in someone else's head. When you replace genuine connection with your own ego, your own unspoken rules, and your own secret tests, you don't build a relationship. You isolate yourself entirely.
You demand that someone else navigate the maze of your insecurities blindfolded, and then you blame them when they hit a wall?
Exactly. We'll leave you with this final, chilling question to mull over on your own. The pawnbroker is eternally tormented by the thought that he was just 5 minutes too late. But based on everything we've unpacked today, was her fate actually sealed the very moment she stood at the gate, deep in thought, and finally said yes to his twisted proposal? Think about that.